All right, let me turn over then to the Navy, of which you are a member of the Sea Service as a Marine. Admiral Jim McPherson is the new acting Secretary of the Navy. I just talked to Admiral Stav. He's very confident of the competence of Admiral McPherson in this job. What say you, Congressman Gallagher?
Well, I don't know him personally, but certainly the Navy is in desperate need of strong leadership right now. Eventually, my hope is that is strong Senate confirmed leadership, visionary leadership along the lines of Jim Layman, because you look not only at this past week, but really the past 3 years, and they have been very difficult years for the Navy. And as for the specific situation with Acting Secretary Modly, it's very unfortunate that it came to this. And in hindsight, I think there were at least 3 different points where things could have gone differently. The first was obviously Captain Crozier's decision to send his original letter on March 30th. The second was the Secretary's decision to relieve Captain Crozier of command prior to the conclusion of an investigation. And the third was the Secretary's unfortunate comments in Guam over the weekend. Of those 3 decision points, I think I'm most concerned about the first, especially in light of the 2017 collisions, which occurred in the exact same part of the world. I want to know a lot more about what led Captain Crozier to send what he assuredly knew would be a career-ending letter, especially because he did not include in the CC line his direct report, Rear Admiral Baker, the Expeditionary Strike Group commander, who was embarked on the Theodore Roosevelt and whose bunk was a few doors down from Crozier's. So I suspect there's a lot more to come out in the intermediate levels between the Strike Group, Pac Fleet, and the 7th Fleet levels. But putting that aside, the Navy really needs energetic, visionary leadership today, because the world, particularly the Indo-PACOM part of the world, where the Navy and the Marine Corps will have to play a disproportionate role, is only going to get more intense and more dangerous.
I talked to Admiral Stavridis about the fact that the $2.2 trillion did not really include any money for shipbuilding. I am stunned by that still. I am told that was an OMB call that may not have actually reached the level of the president. But in a phase 5 or phase 6, it seems to me that would be criminal. If that happened again, the noise versus signal here is we've got to send a signal to the People's Republic of China. That signal to me is both ship acquisition at every level, but especially forward appropriation on the replacement for the Ohio-class nuclear deterrent submarine. And Admiral Stavridis argues that's not even a Navy asset, that's a national asset. What do you think, Congressman? Are we going to get some forward funding of the Columbia class?
Well, we should. And I think the key thing you just said is China, right? The whole reason for doing this is to deter China in a time of crisis, when we know already that China is, one, trying to exploit the crisis, which was of their own making, in order to advance their ideological agenda around the world, but also has threatened to cut off exports to the United States in the form of pharmaceuticals and plunge us into a sea of coronavirus. So we need to be sending a constant, strong signal to China that they should not test us while we're dealing with this crisis. And the Navy and Marine Corps team is uniquely positioned to do that. So what should we be asking for? What should the Navy be asking for? Well, I think most obviously we should ask for another SSN and another frigate. For the former, the top item in the Navy's FY21 unfunded priority list was a second Virginia-class sub, which would cost about $2.7 billion. And for the frigate, they need to award it. One of the things that Secretary Modly was talking about was speeding up the award for that competition. It was supposed to happen this month. It could happen any day now. But the current plan is to award a second frigate in April 2021. Why not just move that up a year? And again, the message of that would be to send a strong signal to the industrial base that not only is there a plan, but there's an enduring plan, so that they can not only continue with their work, but also begin planning additional capital investments to expand capacity in the future. Beyond that, I would also build a couple new hospital ships, Hugh. They could be smaller with 500 and 250 beds, but we've seen the proven utility of the two we have. And I think when we look back on when we started to turn the corner on coronavirus, the image that I will always have in my mind is of the USS the Comfort and the Mercy arriving in LA and New York to provide help to two of our biggest cities that were dealing with the crisis in very acute ways.
I agree with that. I do want to pause, though, and say I think that the Department of Defense has been crippled by year-to-year budgeting for as long as I have been a reporter, and that's not in the Constitution. You can lump sum to defense contractors enough money to build an entire fleet of whatever it is they're building, whether it's airplanes, ships, or submarines, and they can steward that money subject to inspection, but it sends a huge signal down the defense chain, the supply chain, to ramp up. And I do not know why we are a prisoner of annual appropriations, except that it serves the political needs of members of Congress.
Well, in an ideal world, I think beyond defense for the entire budget, we go immediately to biannual budgeting, which we have in Wisconsin, which would help a lot. But you're right. We should be thinking about multi-year funding. Constitutionally, I do believe there is a provision that would prevent the Army currently, as written into the Constitution, from receiving multi-year funding. But I would not quibble with a constitutional scholar such as yourself, because I'm just a lowly Marine from Northeast Wisconsin.
Well, let's remember that. Forward appropriation is not unconstitutional. Forward appropriation is it's done in 1 year. So you give all the money to the contractor in 1 year, in one budget. So it's not, you just give it to the contractor and they have to steward it and report back. That is not unconstitutional. Now, Congressman, are you in touch with the leader McCarthy? Are they gathering the Republicans up occasionally to try and coordinate a strategy for phase 5, 6, 7?
We are, in touch at least once a week as a caucus via conference calls. Some have been issue specific. We've had great calls with Dr. Fauci, who's made himself available on many occasions. And then I just would add that our mutual friend Liz Cheney is doing a great job of trying to corral the national security-minded members of the Republican caucus to think through things like what you just raised, which is to say, how do we fund defense in a 4.0 or a 5.0? How can we hold China accountable? How can we not take our eye off the ball in all the areas related to national security that we know we need to focus on? And so those discussions are underway right now. There is a practical and logistical problem that we are not in session. We are all back home in our districts. And as we saw with 3.0, there is no contingency planning right now for whether and how you could convene and or vote or even debate electronically. This has been actually a subject of debate for over 100 years, and it's not easy to get an institution like Congress to figure out how to do that in a way that is still safe from cyber interference or deepfakes.
I do believe that is a genuine problem, given what we've seen happen with Zoom this week. Let me close this way, Congressman Gallagher. When you were out talking to your constituents at 6 feet apart, at least, I hope, would you ask them what they think about their retirement money? Because I have been urging senators, but not many congressmen, that a lot of people are going to go get that money anyway because they need it, and we're going to tax them at whatever their rate is right now. I think that's appalling. They've saved that money for a rainy day. It was supposed to be their retirement money. They need it now. I think we ought to have a flat tax of 10%. But you ask your constituents what they want to do with their retirement money. I don't think they want to pay taxes on it. I know they waived the penalty for early withdrawal. I know they waived the mandatory distribution. But they all let people go get their money to get through this. I really think you'll find 100% agreement on that if you ask your constituents.
Well, Hugh, I think you're 100% right, and I will spread the gospel here in Northeast Wisconsin. I also think inevitably in any 4.0, we should think about it as a fix to 3.0, a 3.5, and in particular on the small business side. We know that there's going to be far more need than what we appropriated in the bill. I think as of yesterday, there were about 178,000 loans approved. They haven't been distributed yet. That's about $50 billion in total allocations for the $350 billion we appropriated. Think about that. The SBA typically processes about $30 billion a year. They've already exceeded that. And so this isn't a criticism of SBA, which is working overtime to try and get the job done. But I do think it's fair to say their systems are overwhelmed, and it's unclear for when borrowers will actually get their money. And I think most potential applicants I've talked to here in Northeast Wisconsin, even those who've actually applied for it, don't know whether the loan could be forgiven if they keep workers on the payroll, which obviously was a centerpiece of the program and a key incentive in there. So there's going to have to be a lot of action on the small business side. And I hope Speaker Pelosi will put aside any partisan effort to insert pet progressive projects in there and focus on those small businesses and individuals who really need help right now.
Clarity and certainty. Clarity and certainty, Congressman Gallagher. Thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Rep Gallagher. Follow him.